Hello, for this video, we are going to look at some of the basic features of programming using Python in an online compiler. And so input and output are some of the most basic things that you end up doing in programming. And so in Python, if we want to get some input, we can use the input method and we use parentheses. In our double quotes, we put whatever would be helpful to the user to figure out what kind of information we are looking for. So let's say that we want to find out what class they're taking. We would say something like, please enter the course you are taking. You will need to add the space if you want space between, say, the prompt and what the user enters in, because the computer is not going to assume what good output or what a good input looks like. And so let's run this. And you can see now we have in the terminal window, we have, we can enter in something such as intro to programming. And this is all that this program does, is it just takes this input. It doesn't do anything with the input yet, but we'll get to that in a minute. But that is the basics of input. You just ask the user for some information, and then generally you process that information in some way. So let's add some output to this example. So we'll just do a print statement here, and it's very similar to input, except we use the keyword print. Same thing with the double quotes and then the open and close parentheses. So let's say something like, thank you for sharing your course information. And if we run this again, now we have that same input. So I'm just going to say intro, and then we get the output of thank you for sharing your course information. So very simple input, output, and then depending upon the theme of the program, we change the input and output to match that theme. So this is nice if you just want to have a little back and forth with your user, but it doesn't really help us perform any logical steps in our program. So what would be really helpful here is if we added in a variable. And so variables are these little pieces of code that contain some information. And so you can use variables in a variety of ways. You can create a variable and set a value to it when you first create that variable, or you can create a variable, maybe set it to an empty string and then use it. In this case, we might want to have variable set equal to our input so that we could store that information and then we could display it maybe in our output, maybe further along in our program, or we can also display it multiple times. So let's add variables to this. So in Python, it's very easy to create a variable. You just use a variable name, and variable names, they should start with a letter or an underscore. Typically, we'll do letters. They should be descriptive. So let's say that I wanted to create a variable called course taken, or taking whatever. I could set that equal to empty string like this, and then presumably I would set the value at some point later. If I'm just going to be declaring the variable right before the input here, I can just skip this step of the empty string, and I can just combine these lines together. And so now whatever the user enters in this input will be put into this variable, and then typically then we'll want to do something with that variable. And so we can just copy that variable name. That'll save you a lot of trouble if you copy your variable names and paste them instead of trying to type them out. So easy to have typos. So here we could say, thank you for sharing your course information about. And then Python has a number of different ways to use the print statement. And so for this one, we'll just concatenate like so. This is probably the easiest way if you get your plus signs in the right spot. There's also some other ways that will make for a nicely formatted string, but we'll just go with the simplest one for right now. So if we run this again and we say intro to programming, Now, our message, our output is going to say, it's going to be a little bit more descriptive, a little bit more personalized. So thank you for sharing your course information. If we wanted to have this be a little more personalized as well, we could have the course taken information there. And then we can also say something like user's name equals input. What is your name? And then we could use this in here. We could go thank you plus user's name plus, and then make sure that we don't have an extra double quotes there. And so now if we run this again, we'll be asked for 2 pieces of information. So we'll do intro to programming, and we'll also do my name. And so now, I should have an extra comma there, I think, but you get the idea. So we take a couple pieces of information and then we do something with that. In this case, super simple. We're just displaying that information back in our output. So that's the gist of input, output, and variables. Very simple example here. So thanks for watching.